This meeting is being recorded.
All right, welcome everyone. I hope everyone's having a terrific Tuesday. I'm really excited for us all to be here today, not only because this is the first installment in our Fair Housing Training series, but also because our two presenters that are here with us today are dear colleagues of mine and people that I'm humbled to work with every single day. So welcome. I'll start off first with the housekeeping, the boring stuff. This is being recorded. A copy of this recording will be sent out to all registrants. If anyone doesn't receive that or has any trouble, feel free to reach out to me directly. I'll pop my information into the chat once I stop talking. Two, there is live captioning. Folks should be able to see that live captioning down at the bottom of the screen in a black box. If anyone's having trouble, let me know. I know sometimes you have to click show captions or there's a little extra work we've got to do, but I will do what I can to help get you on board. Third, this was approved for CLE credit. I will announce that credit code at the end of the session, and I'll also put that in the chat, and it will also come out in the follow-up email with the recording and any other materials that the speakers are able to share with us. As of right now, the program is certified for 1 general CLE credit. I'm still working with the Florida Bar to get that bias elimination because really we should, that is what this is all about. So we should hopefully be getting that credit, that additional credit, and I'll keep you all posted on that, of course. Goodness gracious, questions and answers. So if anyone has any questions throughout the process of this training, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'm going to do what I can to monitor those and at the end present them to our presenters so that they can answer those for you. Also, they might be able to pop in live time and answer for you. The floor is theirs, it's up to them. So just pop your questions in there so that we can get them answered, because I'm sure that you will have plenty. So I always tend to forget something. I'm getting used to that. I think it's my tagline. I'm going to move right in to the introductions and say, welcome to Fair Housing Rights, Tenants, Homebuyers, and the LGBTQ+ community. In honor of Pride Month, I'm really happy to be here in community with all of you. So first up, and I'm not sure actually who's speaking first, I should have asked. So in no particular order, I have Joseph Cordova, who's an attorney with the Fair Housing Project and the Fair Housing Project Manager at Florida Legal Services. Joe spent the first 2 years of his legal career as an Equal Justice Works Fellow, practicing community lawyering for immigrant families. He has since then transitioned to such efforts into housing discrimination, enforcement, and outreach, where he manages Florida Legal Services Fair Housing Initiative projects via the HUD-funded FHOI/EOI programs. He has his bachelor's degree from DePaul University and an MA from the University of Colorado in Public Policy and a JD from the University of Florida Levin College of Law, and was noted character actor from the avant-garde New York City street acting scene in the early aughts. Have to share that, it's great fact. He has over a decade of experience working with vulnerable populations, performing community development services, and was recognized by the Levin College of Law with the 2018 Helen Gibble Bleachman Memorial Community Service Award. I'm very lucky to work with Joe, and everyone here is really lucky to learn from him today. So we also have Christina Benitez, who is a Florida Legal Services Fair Housing Outreach Coordinator. Christina is a graduate of Ohio State University. Over the past decade, she has worked in a wide variety of professional capacities in both private and public sectors. Christina has experience serving vulnerable populations through her extensive volunteer work in her community. Her work focuses on providing support for the Fair Housing Project by conducting fair housing outreach and education in North Central Florida. I apologize about that, did not turn my phone off. And without further ado, I'm gonna pass that over to Joe and Christina. Thank you both so very much for being here today.
All right. Terrific, well, thank you so much for having us. I went ahead and shared my screen. Can everyone see that? We're good? All right, well, I'll go ahead and kick things off, and you guys will get to hear from both Christina and myself as we move along. So today we're talking about the Fair Housing Act, specifically how LGBTQ plus community has been impacted over the last, I guess we're coming up on about a year and a half since the enforcement of the Fair Housing Act has started to include things like sexual orientation and gender identity. We're going to get into the details about how that came about here in a little bit. But first, we're going to kick off with a little bit of discussion about why this is so important. So 2013 study by the US Department of Housing and Urban Development showed that same-sex couples experience significant levels of discrimination when responding to advertised rental housing in metropolitan areas nationwide. Heterosexual couples were favored over same-sex couples by 16%. According to a 2015 US transgender survey, nearly 1/4 of transgender people reported housing discrimination because of their gender identity. And 1 in 5 transgender people in the United States has been discriminated when seeking a home, and more than 1 in 10 have been evicted from their homes because of their gender identity. As you can probably guess, these are just 4 bullet points of the dozens, if not hundreds of bullet points we probably could have found based on statistics of how members of the LGBTQ plus community have been discriminated against in housing over the years. These bullet points reflect it is nationwide, it is at a large number, and it affects everybody. So in moving along, please just understand that this is a real problem. It's not, something that we considered. Let's just open the door to the next target population. No, this is real. Discrimination has been real for many years. So within really any community, but specific to LGBTQ plus community, when looking for housing, maybe you've heard, sorry, we don't rent to families like yours, or this apartment is going to work for people like you. Sorry, only normal couples can rent here. This neighborhood probably isn't the right fit for you. Now it just isn't a good time to be renting to people like you. These kinds of phrases, these are violations of the Fair Housing Act. I mean, just the words that are being used, the fact that you're saying someone like you is not going to rent here, but someone different than you may. Okay, that's what we're talking about when we talk about the Fair Housing Act. We're really diving into the ideas of differential treatment, and not always just blanket general poor treatment. We're talking about differential treatment. And so phrases like this kind of trigger or at least spark the idea that differential treatment is about to occur or is occurring. So again, this may be a violation of the Fair Housing Act. So the Federal Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination in housing-related transactions because of race, color, religion, national origin, sex, disability, or familial status. I'm going to pick this sentence apart real quick, and then I am going to pass it on to Christina to go a little bit deeper into the protected classes. But we talk about the Federal Fair Housing Act, we're talking about the nationwide Federal Fair Housing Act. That's what we're talking about today. Now, all 50 states have their own version of the Fair Housing Act. The state of Florida is pretty much word for word the same as the Federal Fair Housing Act. So whatever the Federal Fair Housing Act offers, Florida offers the same protections. Now, as you dive deeper into local jurisdictions, counties, municipalities, sometimes you can offer more protections and more rights. Just like the rule is, whatever the federal government gives, you can always give more, but you can't give less, okay? And as we'll talk about here in a little bit, there are certain counties in Florida and definitely states around the country that take these 7 protected classes and have added more to them. And that's kind of the cornerstone of what we're talking about today is the addition of sexual orientation and gender identity, how it's been added versus how it has not technically been added. And we'll go into some details about that. In regards to housing-related transactions, we're talking about anything that regards the potential denial of housing. So whether you're applying for a place to rent, maybe you're just up late at night at 2 in the morning looking on Craigslist for places to rent. You can still be discriminated against if the advertisement is discriminatory. Maybe you're applying for a bank loan to purchase a home. Maybe you're having your home appraised. Anything that is related to housing where someone's decision could ultimately deny you your housing or the equal enjoyment of your housing is a housing-related transaction. And the Fair Housing Act protects against disparate treatment, which is when a policy is discriminatory on its face. So a policy or practice that basically says, I'm going to treat you differently than somebody who is of a different race, color, religion, national origin, sex, disability, or family status. There's also disparate impact. This is when a policy is not discriminatory on its face, but results negatively on one protected class more than another. So I'll give you a quick example, and then we'll dive into these protected classes just a bit. Let's say, for example, you have a policy that says, in order for you to rent here, you must have a social security number. Okay, there's not a protected class that says social security number is protected. So you can have that policy. And as long as it applies to everyone, it's fine. But over the course of a year or two, the more you implement that policy, the people you're turning away from housing all turn out to be immigrants from another country, because they naturally are going to have fewer social security numbers than people who are born in the US. So over time, that policy that is neutral on its face is going to result negatively on one protected class, those people based on national origin. So that's how you can see the Fair Housing Act applies both in disparate treatment and disparate impact. And so I'm going to pass this on to Christina so that she has the opportunity to discuss a little bit more about these protected classes. We'll do a little bit of back and forth here as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with recognizing that the Fair Housing Act is about access or equal access and equal opportunity to housing. And for this reason, people with the same qualifications shouldn't be discriminated because of their race, their color, their disability, their sex, their national origin, their religion, and their familial status. So we've again mentioned the 7 protected classes that are covered. I guess an easy way to remember those who like mnemonics with the 7 protected classes. So we're going to explain each one of them very briefly, but I may ask, we're going to start with race and color. As you can see, they are separated. And each in separate categories. Would anyone be willing to unmute themselves, or maybe in the chat write down what is the difference between race and color? Why are they separated? And I'll take a look here at the chat real quickly.
Yeah, so
anyone
feel free to drop them in the chat. I know unmuting might not be an option for you all, so please feel free to drop in the chat.
Yes, so we'll see. What is the difference between race and color?
I can't see the chat box. Do we have any answers?
That's okay. So yes, they're separated because they're different. Color is the tone of your skin, and race is about ethnicity, right? Your heritage. I think we have one response. Yeah, so you gave an example, right? Very, very nice. Yes, so thank you. Thank you for participating. So yes, they are distinct, although for the most part, we see color being added in claims together with race and national origin. So they're often linked, but they're different. National origin. This is about where you are from, right? Or even it protects your ancestry, where your family is from. Religion includes any religious group or sect. It doesn't matter what religion you are, or whether you have, whether you're an atheist or you have faith or not, okay? Families with children or familial status. So this includes families with minors that are under the age of 18. It also protects people who are pregnant or that are looking to adopt. Disability. Disability is a physical impairment, but it's very to recognize that not only physical, it can be mental. And this includes also those that are regarded as having a disability or a record of having a disability. And what I mean by regarded as having a disability means that you could be someone who doesn't, but if a housing provider thinks you do have a disability and they use that against you, that's discrimination based on disability. So this is anything that substantially limits a major life activity. So another question for you, and I'll answer the question I just saw here in a second. With major life activity, can anyone give me examples of major life activities?
Yes, work.
Yes, absolutely. So Lexi said work. Yes. Anything else? I know some are pretty obvious, right? Like breathing and walking, performing work, learning, and taking care of yourself. Okay. There's a great question here in the chat. How does this work with communities that say they are 55 or older? So that's a great question. There are exemptions. Especially when it comes with families with children. We've often seen cases where we call them, we do have communities that are for older people that are exempt. And there are 3 types of communities for older residents. However, they have to be certified and follow specific guidelines and regulations. But yeah, that was a great question. Am I missing something else we should mention? How does this work with communities that say are 50?
So yeah, if it's a 55 and older community, like Christina just said, it has to be certified. You can't just have a neighborhood where the neighbors get together and say, let's try to keep this 55 and older. No, they actually have to get certified by the state and be identified as a 55 and older community. A lot of times the question then goes, well, what if you're 60 years old, your spouse is 50, and you're watching your grandchild for a year? Okay, well, the 55 and older community probably has its own bylaws that say as long as one person is over 55, that satisfies as far as the couple. As far as the taking care of the grandchild goes, they have the right to say, no, this is 55 and older. But they also usually have some sort of bylaws or policies that say, we'll allow for up to 6 months if you can prove this is an emergency or, prove something like that. But the fact that they're certified as a 55 and older community, if they deny you housing because someone in your household is under 18, they're exempt from the Fair Housing Act.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
Yeah.
I hope that answered your question, Edward. And if not, we're happy to elaborate more on that topic. But yes, I'm glad you brought it up. Now, I left sex at the end for a reason, because we'll be discussing this one further. But this is usually what we refer to as gender. However, it includes sexual harassment, and there are 2 types: quid pro quo and hostile environment. Now, quid pro quo is when housing benefits are being conditioned in exchange for sexual favors. And hostile environment, it's when or even a tenant is being with their enjoyment of the premises. And finally, even though it's not explicitly enumerated, sex also includes sexual orientation and gender identity, which is the big topic of today. And now I'm going to pass it back to Joe, so
all right,
we can discuss more.
Terrific. Yeah. And just so everyone knows, the 7 protected classes, Christina did a great job of summarizing it, I mean, these 7 protected classes, we could do a whole presentation just on these, but we probably just do an entire series just on these 7 protected classes. So I'm hoping there are actually, some questions about, well, what about this? What about that when it comes to these protected classes? Because these protected classes, this is the bulk of the Fair Housing Act. But specifically for today, we intentionally summarize these 7 so that we can move on for a deeper discussion about how sexual orientation and gender identity are being enforced under the Fair Housing Act. Which takes us to the summer of 2020 and the court case, Bostock versus Clayton County. So the US Supreme Court analyzed what protections are encompassed under Title VII discrimination on the basis of sex. So this was a this was an employment-based discrimination case. And the court determined that sex-based discrimination encompasses gender identity and sexual orientation. They used very simple legal reasoning that basically said, if an employer allows a woman to love a man and keep her job, but does not allow a man to love a man and keep his job, you're allowing the woman to do something that you're not allowing the man to do. That is gender-based discrimination. That is sex-based discrimination. So sexual orientation, in its nature, is sex-based discrimination. So yeah, I just explained this slide here. So yeah, you're giving different terms and conditions based on the gender of the employee. You're allowing one gender to do something that you're not allowing another gender to do. So some important quotes from the Bostock v. Clayton County case is, an employer who fires an individual for being homosexual or transgender fires that person for traits or actions it would not have questioned in members of a different sex. Sex plays a necessary and undisguisable role in the decision, exactly what Title VII forbids. The court also said, we agree that homosexuality and transgender status are distinct concepts from sex, but as we've seen, discrimination based on homosexuality or transgender status necessarily entails discrimination based on sex. The first cannot happen without the second. This is the Supreme Court. This is Justice Neil Gorsuch writing this opinion on behalf of, I believe it was a 6-3 majority. So the impact of this Bostock case law precedent since the summer of 2020, as of, I think it was a month ago I checked this. I could check again today on Westlaw and it would probably be more. 565 cases have cited to this legal reasoning, okay? This has quickly become a landmark case when it comes to legal reasoning and how you can recognize sexual orientation and gender identity-based discrimination, not just in the workplace, but in all facets of life. Title IX, this is education. So Title IX, like Title VII, prohibits discrimination against a person because he is transgender, because this constitutes discrimination based on sex. This is actually a Florida case, Adams v. School Board of St. Johns County, Florida. It has received negative treatment, so there's not a clear precedent yet. The reason why there's not a clear precedent yet is because this case and its legal reasoning is so brand new. Courts all over the country are trying to find where do exemptions lie, okay? Is this a blanket legal reasoning that says this type of discrimination is always going to be sex-based discrimination, or will there be exemptions? So Title IX, this Adams v. School Board is an excellent example of a case where the court is starting to twist the legal reasoning just a bit. Does it apply to schools? Does it apply to minors? Where and when does it not apply? So it's probably going to be at least a couple of years before we really see how this legal reasoning settles into place as far as every court opinion is concerned. However, in addition to the case law precedent, the impact of Bostock had a major impact on department rules and enforcement. Basically, because the Bostock case took place in summer 2020, it was only 6-7 months later that a new presidential administration came in. And that presidential administration basically said, we're going to take this legal reasoning and we're going to sprinkle it throughout every agency and every department that we're in charge of. And this took place via memos and policies. So the most important document that was put forth, this came in, I believe it was late January 2021. This is Executive Order 13988. In Bostock v. Clayton County, the Supreme Court held that Title VII's prohibition on discrimination because of sex covers discrimination on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation. Under Bostock's reasoning, laws that prohibit sex discrimination, including Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, the Fair Housing Act, and Section 412 of the Immigration Nationality Act, along with their respective implementing regulations, prohibit discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation, so long as the laws do not contain sufficient indications to the contrary. So the Biden administration basically said Bostock legal reasoning now applies everywhere. That's what Executive 13988 is about. And Section 2 of this executive order enforces prohibitions on sex discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation. The Section 2 basically told every agency, every department to review and enforce all policies to prevent sex discrimination as it pertains to the Bostock ruling throughout all agencies. So this executive order not only recognized the legal reasoning, but it enforced it throughout. So how does this apply to fair housing? On February 11th, 2021, just a couple weeks after Executive Order 13988 was put forth, the Warden Memo, this is reference to Jeannie Warden, I believe it was the acting deputy assistant. Remember, we have a brand new administration, so not everybody's in their jobs fully yet, at least in February 11th, 2021. Basically said, this memo said that the implementation of Executive Order 13988 on the enforcement of the Fair Housing Act, keep in mind that word enforcement. We're going to come back to that. It was effective immediately. FHEO, the Fair Housing offices, Fair Housing programs shall accept for filing and investigate all complaints of sex discrimination, including discrimination because of gender identity or sexual orientation, that meet other jurisdictional requirements. So that basically means if you are going to file a complaint under the Fair Housing Act directly to HUD or directly to a HUD enforcement FAP and FHAP, you can go ahead and do so and say that the reason behind your complaint is that you feel that you were discriminated against based on your gender identity or sexual orientation. So effective immediately, complaints that come in that say sexual orientation is the basis, those will be received and investigated. This memorandum also affects state and local agencies that enter into agreements with the department under the Fair Housing Assistance Program, that FAP that I just mentioned, pursuant to which such agencies process discrimination complaints under laws that the department certifies as substantially equivalent to the Fair Housing Act. This means that if your state or your local jurisdiction operates a grant or an investigative and enforcement-based grant project under HUD, you are now going to be enforcing that grant to include sexual orientation and gender identity. So this memo, started at the top and it trickled its way all the way down to the local jurisdictions and the local projects as they move forward and enforce this new legal reasoning. Similarly, organizations and agencies that receive grants, like I just said, through HUD's Fair Housing Initiative Program. These are FIPs. The FIPs are the organizations that take the HUD grant and they go into the community and they promote fair housing education and outreach. They encourage people to file complaints. They assist and represent people as they file complaints. So as they carry out their activities under these grant agreements, they must interpret sex discrimination under the Fair Housing Act to include discrimination because of sexual orientation and gender identity. Again, it is wide reaching and it goes all the way down to the folks who have their boots on the ground doing this kind of work. So let's go back to that word enforcement. The Fair Housing Act itself did not change. They did not add 2 protected classes. The 7 protected classes that Christina went over with you, those were the same before 2021, and they are the exact same now. It's that sex and gender as a protected class are now being enforced to include sexual orientation and gender identity. So they did not rewrite the law to include 2 new protected classes. Those classes are now enforced under. So they are not explicitly enumerated in the language of the law. However, what gets a little confusing, and this is where we're going to take this discussion a little bit further, is that, as I mentioned earlier, if you have a state or a local jurisdiction that has its own Fair Housing Act, you have those 7, everyone has to have those 7, and you can add more. Many across the country added sexual orientation and gender identity already. So for example, here in Florida, we have some counties that had language that included sexual orientation and gender identity before 2021. Alachua County, we have certain municipalities, Orlando, I know Daytona Beach did. There are different counties and jurisdictions throughout the state that already had that language written in there, which means there are some jurisdictions, counties, and municipalities that did not have the language written in there. So as of February 2021, it doesn't matter if you had it written in there or not. It is now enforced, okay? You cannot say not in our county. You could say our county ordinance doesn't include it, but because the federal Fair Housing Act enforces it, it doesn't matter what your county ordinance says. It's a part of the law from now on. But we're gonna take this discussion just a tad further to kind of help add some clarity. I'm gonna pass this on to Christina right now. Oops, you might be muted. Tell you what, I'll read this one while you unmute yourself. That's fine. I'll pass back to you in a sec. So the community research and awareness, as of 2016, there were, as I mentioned, there were 22 states that had laws prohibiting housing discrimination based on sexual orientation. And 19 of those had bans on housing discrimination based on gender identity. As I mentioned just a little bit ago, Alachua County here in Florida has it written in there. Sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression. However, in our own research in Northern Florida, we grabbed 12 North Central Florida counties, basically from coast to coast on the peninsula and then between Jacksonville and Orlando. We carved out a chunk of area in those 12 Central Florida counties. Some of them are small town rural, some of them have larger cities. Only 3 of the 12 have language that included sexual orientation and gender identity in their fair housing ordinances. So this is an example, and this is somewhat uncommon in US history, where it's the federal government that moved forward before the local jurisdictions did. Usually our history it has a pattern of states and counties and cities taking steps forward first. The federal government likes to sit back and watch and see how it plays out. You know, the perfect example over the last 10 to 15 years would be as we start to see states legalize medical marijuana and then eventually recreational marijuana, the federal government sits back with its arms folded and tries to see what's happening. Is crime, going up? What are the tax revenues looking like? How is it playing out? Once they realize that the water is safe, that's usually when the federal government steps in. This is reverse. This is one of the few times where the federal government says, we're going to go ahead and enforce the Fair Housing Act to include sexual orientation and gender identity, and we're going to expect the states and the local jurisdictions to catch up. So the impact of Bostock so far in regards to filing complaints, and I'm gonna end this little paragraph here with a question to the group. I'd like to hear your response. So HUD in turn has started to take steps to more proactively solicit concerns from LGBTQ tenants and homeowners. How have they been taking proactive steps to solicit these concerns? You're listening to it right now. We are a FIP program. We are one of those HUD projects that we talked about earlier. Our job is to do presentations like these to get the word out, to tell people, hey, you can now file a complaint under sexual orientation and gender discrimination-based discrimination. This is how HUD is doing it. This is how they're being proactive and solicit these concerns. And so in announcing the Warden Memo last year, HUD officials said they had received 197 claims of housing discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity in 2020. A HUD spokesperson told Vox the agency had received 232 cases in 2021. Still a far cry from the number of race-based, 2,514, and disability-related, 4,855 complaints filed last year. It will take time, experts say, before more LGBTQ Americans really learn about the agency changes and trust HUD to take their problem seriously. So I'm curious, in the chat box, the question to the group is, why have there not been that many claims so far? Is it because this type of discrimination actually isn't that prevalent? Is it because it's so new and people don't know about it yet? Why else? Why are the number of claims not as high as we thought they might be? And I'd love to see some ideas in the chat box, or if anybody does have the opportunity to unmute, feel free to. we'll enjoy a little bit of awkward silence as we wait for some chats to come through. Fear, okay, the first one, Alexis, fear, intimidation to stay quiet. Please keep typing in your answers, but let's go ahead and address that one. Okay, lack of awareness. Yes. One of the things Christina and I have found when we conduct our outreach, especially into the LGBTQ plus community, this is also true with immigrant communities. And Alexis, you hit it right on the head, fear and intimidation to stay quiet. Because for so long, laws have not been on the side of this community, there's a lot of distrust. I don't believe you. You tell me that I'm protected, but I don't believe you. Not to mention, oh, I'm protected, show me where the law says I'm protected. Oh, well, it's not written in it, but it's being enforced as if it is. You know, you're obviously lying to me. If you can't point to the language that says I'm protected, then I'm not protected. So yeah, there's distrust, there's disbelief. Am I really protected? Well, let's see, lack of awareness. I'd say that people might not be aware that there's so much advocacy. Yes, okay. I'm being discriminated against based on the sexual orientation. What do I do? Are there advocate organizations that are aware of my rights that are available to protect me? Who do I call? Like, what's the first step I should be taking? Yes, the distrust. I don't know where to find. Yeah, it's one thing to say, congratulations, you now are protected. It's another thing to say you're protected and here's what you do about it. Here's the number you call. Here's the website you go to. Here's how you file a complaint. So in addition to presentations like this, where we're basically trying to throw as much information out into the community as possible and hit as many people, it's also important that we say, and here's what you can do about it. So that number, and then also the discrepancies and differences from a federal and local. Yes, yes, okay. That is the perfect comment that's going to lead us into the next slide here. The last thing I want to say about this paragraph before I pass it on to Christina is, one, yes, it does take time before people become aware of their rights and start to exercise those rights. But it's more than just time. It's about creating that trust. Creating trust that if you actually do something about it, something will happen for you. If you've been spending your whole time living in the shadows or living in fear or distrusting the system because it has yet to serve you, just because someone comes along and gives a presentation and says, hey, guess what, you're protected now, it takes a whole lot more than that. It takes these advocate organizations to really reach out. To really do their job in saying, not only is this available to you, but I'm here and I'm accessible to you to help you along the way. So I think it's going to take more than just time. It's going to take work as well. I want to pass this on to Christina. So we have a comment that says the discrepancies and differences from a federal and local level protections. That takes us exactly to this slide. And Christina, I'll pass this on to you.
Okay, yes, so I think we've gained a good understanding of how gender identity and sexual orientation are enforced under the Fair Housing Act. I do want to point out something that's important when we are standing with and serving the LGBTQ community is that we have to consider that there are unique challenges that they face. So it's not just about sexual orientation and gender identity, but think about an LGBTQ person who is of color or is living with HIV or a disability, or somebody who is an elderly person. So there's a lot of intersections that need to be considered when serving the LGBTQ community. So we do think that it's very important to provide education and do outreach, and not only to those that are looking for housing, but also we want to educate the housing providers, that is the real estate agents, the lenders, because many times they don't know that their policies are discriminatory. So yes, I think it's not that we want to see the number of discrimination cases to go up, but what we want to see is people who are being discriminated to come forward. So here's a question for you. Do we need to update ordinance and state law language? What do you think? Should we do so or should we not? Some people think yes, for best practices. It will lead to clarity and harmony of language if it's explicitly, if the language is explicitly written under the Fair Housing Act. Some say no, it's not necessary. So I would like to know what you think. And again, feel free to write it down in the chat box.
And as hopefully we get some responses, think about you're a person who could benefit from the new enforcement of the law. How do you find out if you are protected if you're not listening to one of these presentations? You're someone who's being discriminated against. It's obvious that you're being discriminated against because of your sexual orientation, and you don't know if you're protected. Where do you look? Do you go to your local ordinance? Do you go to the Federal Fair Housing Act? Like, what's a good idea to make sure that people know their rights? We have an answer, yes. We should, for more inclusivity awareness, yes. Okay.
So it seems like we have.
Yeah, you know, Christina and I were talking, yes, it shows a commitment from the government. Yeah, you have to deal with rather than the amorphous agency of Washington. Yeah, that's a good point. The more local your protections are, or at least the more local your protections are clearly stated, I think the more real it feels. It's not so distant, it's not so far away, it's not so faceless. Yeah, that's a great point. Christina and I, we were talking about this morning about, you know, what's our answer to this question? And I think both of us said, yes, we think the language should be updated, even though it might not technically be necessary, because whether your county says it's protected or not, it's protected. But to actually write it down and to have people be able to read it when they do their research, it's going to have a little bit more, I guess, teeth to its bite when you realize that this is protected. Yes, websites so that people can Google to get information. Honestly, the more we change the language, the more a Google search is going to bring up that this is part of the protections. It's not going to be hidden anymore. It's not going to be, I heard about it from these two people on a webinar. You could actually look it up and see that it's protected. Yeah, as an attorney, you could run case law, if not, you know, find any. That's a great point. So if you're on the receiving end of discrimination and you have an attorney, the attorney can go to work for you. If you don't have an attorney yet, you might not know how to do a case law search. So you're kind of looking for any language you can find. Yes, Alexis, why not require landlords to include language in their leases? Like, yes, like proper notice. Yeah, I like that idea. How we could enforce that is the next step, but that's a great idea. If in fact, leases should now have a fair housing statement anyways. I mean, if you apply for a job, it has an equal opportunity statement. Yeah, that's a great point.
I think we had really good feedback.
Yeah, really good responses here. So let's see, I think we have good timing here. We can move on to some more Q&A. If a client expresses concern about the Supreme Court. Okay. Oh, I like that. Let's talk about that a little bit. We talked about the idea of, you know, hey, the Bostock case is what was the catalyst for enforcing sexual orientation and gender identity protections under the Fair Housing Act. But what if the Supreme Court simply says, we don't believe in precedent anymore? So the next time a case like this is brought to our attention, we're just going to change our minds. How can you convince members of the LGBTQ community, and really a lot of members of any community underneath the Fair Housing Act, that these protections are going to continue to apply? Well, they apply now. And the more we act on these complaints, the more we push forward and enforce these complaints, you know, it's going to have as big of an impact as we possibly can now. Obviously, we can't say what the Supreme Court will and won't do for cases moving forward, but we can definitely act now. That's a great point, Eric. Thank you for bringing that forth. I guess we don't have a specific answer, But yeah, it's a great point. Some states and local officials saying what the government federal is doing things out of bounds. Yeah, Edward, that's a great point as far as the relationship between local jurisdictions and the federal government. A lot of times local officials feel like the federal government is overstepping their reach. We have federalism in this country. The federal government, you do your thing, we local governments, we do our thing. And as long as we're not conflicting with each other, we can do our own thing. But the more you have local governments buy into what the federal government is doing, the more, I guess, commonplace it becomes that if you're a county that does not specifically write into its ordinance sexual orientation and gender identity protections, you're the outlier. You're the county that is not playing ball with everybody else. Whether you write it or not, you still have to enforce it. But it'd be nice if you wrote it in your laws so that you could be in concert, and complement all the other laws across this country. But I do believe, Edward, in your point that you're going to see a lot of local governments probably have some pushback. I imagine if we went earlier when I said only 3 of the 12 counties we researched had the language in there. I'm guessing if we went to those 9 other counties right now and said, you guys need to change your language, I'm guessing 6 of them would laugh us out of the room and say, no, we're not going to, that's not who we are, and now we're definitely not going to do it because the federal government wants us to. So you're definitely going to see some pushback. Whether that pushback has any, bite to it, it won't, because the federal government protects it. But yeah, you might see some local jurisdictions intentionally leave it out. So what other questions, comments do we have, whether it's about LGBTQ plus rights or honestly just the Fair Housing Act in general?
Yeah, so feel free to drop those questions in the chat. Thank you so much for being for participating and being so active. It's been really, really thoughtful and really, really engaging. So while folks are dropping their questions into the chat, I'm going to put some information about the CLE, buy some people some time. So for everyone to know, the CLE course number is 6126. You'll get that information also in a follow-up email. So questions, keep them coming. There we go.
Oh, I haven't memorized all of the counties across the state or local jurisdictions.
And I'll read that question out loud for anyone that might not see it in the chat. It says, how does the Sarasota and Manatee County, how do the Sarasota County and Manatee County codes say on this subject? Stay on the subject.
I would have to look it up. The best way to look it up is there's the Municode, and then just kind of search within the Municode fair housing. Every county does have its own fair housing ordinance, the details of which are going to be different from county to county. And then honestly, same with the individual cities. So for example, if you're standing in the city of St. Augustine, you have more protections than if you take a stroll down the road and now you're just in the county, but not in the city. So honestly, you could be balancing on one foot on one side of the street and have more protections than if you cross the street, depending on where you happen to be. So every county, every municipality is going to be different as far as offering more protections, but just know that those 7 we talked about, that is a must. All 7 will always be protected.
So I had a question while people are thinking, and I don't know if it's a question you know the answer to, and sometimes I think I ask some silly questions.
You never know.
I learned so much from all of the speakers that I get to highlight through this. So is there any state, I know how you said sort of the numbers in Florida about actual reporting of issues, and here's my dog, actually reporting of issues. Are there any states that actually have like a really high amount of people that report and maybe get some recourse? Do you happen to know the numbers?
I don't know the numbers. I can tell you though, New York and New York City specifically has very, very active like fair housing. So the FIPS and the FAPS that we are, the HUD programs and stuff like that. In New York, they've been around so long that, it's like they have people on every corner kind of a thing.
Sure.
So when discrimination is happening in New York, it doesn't mean that it's always exposed, but it's more likely to be exposed because their enforcement programs have been around so long and they're so far reaching that, and obviously New York City is such a high population anyways, those numbers are always going to go up. But from what I've heard in talking to other programs, New York City really seems to kind of lead the charge in recognizing that all of these protected classes are going to have higher numbers in New York City, and they seem to get those complaints filed quite a bit. You're going to see a lower proportion and lower percentages when you get to Middle America and the smaller states, stuff like that. So I'll give you an example. Florida, we have 7 or 8 FIP organizations that do the outreach, the education, the enforcement. And then we also have 4 or 5 FAPs, which actually do the investigations. You can skip across the country and go to a state like, I think, Nebraska. I think they have 1 total for all of it.
Wow.
Yeah, so as far as how these grants get put out into the country, I think HUD does a pretty good job of finding where the most people are and putting the most programs there, but it's not an exact science. So for example, the state of California, I could get this wrong, I probably shouldn't be saying this, but last time I looked up California, they have lots of programs, but they only have 1 state investigatory agency, whereas Florida has 5. So the entire state of California has 1 organization doing the investigations. Yeah, and the answer for why, I don't know.
Yeah, that doesn't make much sense.
Yeah.
So another question did come in. Is there a particular county or local ordinance other than St. Augustine that you think has an especially good fair housing ordinance?
I usually use Alachua County as the bar we should be setting. In addition to the 7 protected classes that everyone has, Alachua County offers 6 more. Citizenship status, source of income, marital status, age. They specifically have sexual orientation and gender discrimination. And, what's that last one? I always forget that last one. I'll have to look it up before I get it wrong. Or is it on that other screen, maybe? Let's see. Did I have it in there? They wrote their law in chunks and pieces, so there's a different part of their law that recognizes the additional protected classes. But Alachua County, they have 13 protected classes. So yeah, I would say that.
Awesome. So folks, keep putting your questions in. We're here till 1, we'll answer them. In the meantime, I was gonna show our fair housing series and the upcoming dates. Is that something that would be good to do now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, we got something, hold on. Eric shared, he said, they said, excuse me, I am in New Jersey and the state released a draft analysis of impediments to fair housing in New Jersey. And there's a link there. Eric, if that's okay with you, I'll include this in the follow-up materials, send it out to folks so they can take a look at it. Very cool. Thank you for sharing. Perfect. Thank you. So I am not as good as my presenters at sharing my screen. I am struggling today, talking, my phone going off, my dog. I don't know what is going on today. So I'm going to try to share my screen. Basically, as we told folks earlier, this is a fair housing training series. What that means is in July, we're going to have another installment. In August, we're going to have another installment. And in September, we're going to have another installment. And each of those topics is going to be different. So this was our kickoff in honor of Pride Month, but let me see if I can share this. If Siri wants to talk to me. Okay. There we go. All right. So the upcoming dates that we have July 26th. It's going to be Fair Housing 101. August 30th, Fair Housing, everything you need to know about disability rights and emotional support animals, but we're afraid to ask. And September 27th, Fair Housing, acknowledging, addressing, and attacking disparate impact discrimination. I will also send out this and all of the RSVPs. That way you can register, to attend along with the recording and the CLE code and all of that information. Remember, if you register, even if you can't attend, you get a copy of the recording and all of the information so you can learn on your own time. So just while I leave this up, anything else to say about this, Joe and Christina?
No, that looks great. Thank you for putting that together. It looks fantastic.
Awesome. So
I will say about the post about the impediments, the impediments to fair housing in New Jersey. I'm happy you shared that. Thank you so much. We've read through some of those analyses of impediments throughout some of our other counties and jurisdictions here in Florida. There seems to be a common, a little bit of a pattern. And that pattern is usually, having reviewed the impediments to fair housing, it's a result of low income wages and lack of mobility and public transportation. It's never because we actually have discrimination. For some reason, counties and cities, they don't like to admit to the fact that their apartment communities and their landlords are blatantly discriminating. A lot of times they'll just try to brush it off as, if we had more money in our county, discrimination would go away. I don't know, that doesn't seem like a very responsible answer. And so if people ever grab hold of these analysis of impediments in different counties, cities, and states, you might see the same pattern I saw, which is there's more to the problem than what they're admitting to.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you all for participating and providing us your thoughts and your questions. I think I can speak for everyone and say that this was an awesome training, really eye-opening, and really just engaging, and an awesome way for me to end. Well, we'll never end Pride Month; it's Pride forever, but to end June. So with that, I know you both have been speaking a lot, but are there any last things that you want to say before we close out today?
No, this is our job, education outreach. So if anybody out there is like, hey, we'd like to collaborate or partner further, just let us know. That's what we'd like to do. So the more we can get this word out, the better.
I was going to say, on that note, Joe and Christina will go in person. If there's a community area that you need outreach to, not just attorneys, not just people in the legal field, but to the community, to organizations and people, Joe and Christina will go. So you reach out and you let us know, and we'll make it happen.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So with no further questions in the chat, and Christina, did you want to say anything, or are you good?
Oh, no, I agree. And I extend the invitation to everyone as well.
There you go. You heard it, people. So you've got some thank yous coming in through the chat. Very well done, very informative. And I hope we get to see you all at the next installment of our training series. It'll be Joe and Christina back in action, and we hope to see you all there. So with that, I am going to stop the recording.